For decades, I built an unbreakable fortress of hatred against the world. It took one little girl's smile to blow it to pieces. The world, as far as I was concerned, was a symphony of irritation, played on out-of-tune instruments. Every morning, the screech of my neighbor's poorly maintained car alarm was the opening note. The incessant chatter of the morning news anchors, all teeth and no substance, was the shrill woodwind section. And the people were the cacophonous, blaring brass, each one vying to be the loudest, the most obnoxious, the most in my way. I hated it. I hated all of it, with a quiet, simmering passion that had become the furnace of my existence. My apartment was my sanctuary, a fortress of solitude and silence. I worked from home as a data analyst, a perfect job for someone who preferred the clean, predictable logic of spreadsheets to the messy, unpredictable chaos of human interaction. My groceries were delivered. My mail was digital. I had curated a life that was a meticulously constructed wall against the noise. But sometimes the wall had to be breached. Today was one of those days. The delivery service had mixed up my order, leaving me with 3 bags of organic kale and no coffee. A true emergency. So I found myself in hell. Or as the sign read, Happy Mart. The fluorescent lights hummed a tune of pure misery, casting a sickly, sterile glow on the aisles of brightly colored poison. A woman was blocking the entire coffee aisle, her cart parked sideways while she stared mesmerized at her phone, a slow, vapid smile on her face. I stood behind her for a full minute, my knuckles white on my own cart's handle, the fury built in my chest, a hot, familiar pressure. I could have said, "Excuse me," but that would involve an interaction, an exchange of fake pleasantries. It was easier to just seethe, to let the hatred burn away the impulse to connect. She finally moved, oblivious, and I grabbed the darkest roast I could find. My lifeline. At the checkout, the cashier, a teenager named Brittany, according to her tag, offered me a smile so practiced it looked painful. "Find everything okay today?" she chirped, the words sliding out in a pre-programmed sequence. I grunted, placing the coffee on the belt. "Gonna be a fun weekend." She tried again, her eyes already glazing over as she scanned the item. "It's Tuesday," I said, my voice flat and cold. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before the corporate programming kicked back in. "Right. Well, have a good one anyway." I paid, snatched my bag, and walked out without a word. Each of these tiny, meaningless exchanges was like a paper cut on my soul. They served no purpose other than to remind me of the vast, empty chasm of phoniness that society was built upon. Back in my apartment, the silence was a balm. I brewed the coffee, the rich aroma the only thing I had truly enjoyed all day. I took my mug to my balcony, my perch. It overlooked a small, scruffy park. It was another source of my daily torment. It was a magnet for noise, children screaming, parents yelling, teenagers blasting terrible music from tiny speakers. It was a stage for the relentless, pointless drama of human life, and I was its most unwilling spectator. I sat in my chair, sipping my coffee, and watched the performance. A couple was having a low-grade argument near the swing set. A group of young men were tossing a frisbee, their whoops and hollers like nails on a chalkboard. And then I saw them. A family setting up a small picnic on a checkered blanket. Father, mother, 2 rambunctious boys, and a little girl. They were just more noise, another ensemble in the orchestra of my annoyance. The little girl couldn't have been more than 4 or 5. She wore a bright pink dress that was a violent slash of color against the dull green of the grass. Her hair was done up in 2 neat pigtails that bounced as she ran, chasing after a soap bubble her father had blown. She was a whirlwind of motion, a tiny, shrieking hurricane of childhood. I scowled into my mug. Why couldn't they just be still? Why did everything have to be so loud, so vibrant? I watched her, my disgust a comfortable old coat. She chased the bubble with a single-minded determination that was almost respectable, if it wasn't so pointless. The iridescent sphere floated on the breeze, rising higher, drifting towards my building. The girl followed, her head tilted back, her mouth a perfect O of concentration. The bubble popped a few feet from my balcony. She stopped, her shoulders slumping in momentary defeat. and then she looked up. Her gaze drifted past the brickwork, past the other balconies, and for a reason I will never understand, it landed directly on me. We made eye contact. My face was set in its usual mask of stony contempt. I was a gargoyle perched on the edge of my fortress, looking down on the world I despised. Any other child would have been intimidated. They would have looked away, maybe hidden behind their mother's legs. I fully expected it. I almost welcomed it. Another small victory in my war against connection. But she didn't look away. Her big brown eyes stayed locked on mine. And then the impossible happened. She smiled. It wasn't a small, polite thing. It wasn't a hesitant, shy gesture. It was a full wattage supernova of a smile of pure, unadulterated, unprompted joy. It was a smile that didn't ask for anything in return. It was a smile that simply existed, a beacon of light aimed directly at the darkest corner of the universe, me. And in that instant, something broke. It wasn't a gentle thaw. It was a violent shattering. A sharp, hot pain lanced through my chest, so intense I dropped my mug. It clattered on the concrete, coffee splashing across my feet. I gasped, clutching at my shirt, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. It wasn't a heart attack. It felt different. It felt like a lock, rusted shut for decades, had just been blasted open with dynamite. The air caught in my throat, and my eyes burned. Not with tears, but with the shock of a feeling so alien I couldn't even name it. The world swam before my eyes, the park, the trees, the sky all blurring into a meaningless smear of color. And all I could see, burned onto the back of my eyelids, was that little girl's smile, tearing a hole right through me. I stumbled back from the balcony door, my hand still pressed to my chest as if to hold my splintering self together. My breath came in ragged, unfamiliar hitches. The world had tilted on its axis, and I was sliding off. I leaned against the cool glass, my forehead pressed to it, trying to ground myself. My mind, my greatest asset, the cold, logical engine that had navigated me through a world I despised, was sputtering, failing. It offered no explanation. It cycled through a dozen rational possibilities, a pinched nerve, a sudden spike in blood pressure, a psychosomatic reaction to caffeine, and rejected them all. Because I knew, with a terrifying, primal certainty, that this wasn't a physical malfunction. It was an emotional one, and I didn't do emotions. They were messy, illogical, a weakness I had long ago excised from my being. I risked a glance back down into the park. The family was packing up their things. The father folded the blanket while the mother wiped the boys' faces. And the girl, she was skipping toward the path, her back to me, those bouncing pigtails a rhythmic, mocking pulse in my vision. She hadn't even given me a second thought. To her, I was just a shape in a window. She had launched a nuclear warhead into the heart of my fortified existence and then just skipped away without a care in the world. The unfairness of it was staggering. For the rest of the day, I was useless. My spreadsheets were a meaningless jumble of figures. The cursor on my screen blinked, 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 a tiny, rhythmic accusation of my own paralysis. The silence in my apartment, once my most cherished companion, now felt suffocating. It was an empty space that my brain insisted on filling with the ghost of that smile. I'd close my eyes and see it. A flash of white against dark skin. A moment of pure, unfiltered light. It was an after-image burned into my retina. A visual echo I couldn't escape. The next day I found myself at the window again. And the next, my work lay forgotten. My meticulous routines crumbled. I became a sentry at my own window, my gaze sweeping the park below. Not with my usual disdain, but with a new, frantic purpose. I was looking for her. I told myself it was a scientific inquiry. I needed to see her again to analyze the phenomenon, to understand the trigger, to ensure it wouldn't happen again. It was a lie, and a flimsy one at that. The truth, ugly and terrifying, was that I didn't know if I wanted to prevent it from happening again, or if I desperately wanted it to. Days bled into a week. Other children played in the park. They screamed, they laughed, they tumbled on the grass, and I felt nothing. The old irritation was there, a low, familiar hum, but it was muted, buried under this new, dominant frequency of... what? Longing? It was a pathetic, disgusting word. But as I watched them, I realized it was true. They weren't her. Their smiles were just smiles. Their laughter was just noise. None of them looked up. None of them possessed the same strange, world-altering power that she did. The hatred that had been the fuel for my engine for so long was gone, and in its place was a vast, echoing emptiness. It was worse. The hatred had been a shield, a purpose. It defined me. Without it, I was just empty, a hollow man in a silent room, waiting for a little girl he didn't know to reappear. And, what? Save him? The thought was so absurd it was almost comical. By Friday, I was a wreck. I hadn't filed my weekly reports. I had barely eaten. My existence had narrowed to this vigil. She didn't come back. Maybe they were just visiting. Maybe they lived across town. Maybe I would never see her again. And that thought, that simple possibility, brought back the pain in my chest, not sharp this time, but as a dull, crushing weight. I couldn't live like this. The not knowing was a poison. Waiting was a prison. For the first time in years, I made a decision that wasn't born of necessity or logic. It was an impulse, raw and undeniable. I stood up, walked to my closet, and put on a pair of shoes I hadn't worn in months. My hands trembled slightly as I tied the laces. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, and walked out of my apartment, the click of the closing door sounding like a final damning verdict. I didn't take the elevator. I took the stairs, my steps heavy on the concrete, each one a betrayal of the life I had so carefully constructed. I walked out the main entrance of the building and into the noise, into the light. It was overwhelming. The sun was too bright, the air too thick with the smell of cut grass and car exhaust. I walked into the park, my feet unsteady on the soft earth. I felt exposed, vulnerable, a creature of the shadows dragged into the blinding glare of day. I made my way to the spot where their blanket had been. I stood there feeling like the world's biggest fool. What was I doing? What did I expect to find? My eyes scanned the ground, the trampled grass, the dandelions, and then I saw it. A tiny splash of color against the green, almost hidden beneath a clover leaf. I bent down, my knees cracking in protest, and plucked it from the ground. It was a plastic hair clip, a barrette. It was shaped like a small, bright yellow butterfly, its wings outstretched as if in mid-flight. And I knew, with a certainty that resonated in the very marrow of my bones, I knew it was hers. I closed my hand around the plastic butterfly, its cheap, sharp edges digging into my palm. It was a flimsy, insignificant thing, a piece of mass-produced junk that probably cost $0.25. But as I held it, the weight of it in my hand felt immense, a tiny anchor in the swirling chaos of my mind. It was real. It was proof. Proof that she wasn't a hallucination, that the cataclysmic event on my balcony had actually happened. This little piece of yellow plastic was a fragment of the supernova that had obliterated my world. I walked back to my apartment building, moving through the sea of people not with my usual simmering rage, but with a strange sense of detachment. It was as if I were in a bubble, the noise and motion of the city, a distant, muffled roar. The world hadn't changed, but my relationship to it had. The hatred was still there, a vestigial organ, but it no longer felt like the core of my being. It was just background noise. My focus had narrowed to the impossible object in my hand. Back in my fortress, I placed the barrette on my clean, sterile desk, next to my keyboard. It looked absurd there, a tiny, vibrant rebellion against the monochrome order of my life. I stared at it for hours. A data analyst solves problems by gathering information, identifying patterns, and reaching logical conclusions. My life was now a problem. The girl was the variable. The smile was the anomaly. And this butterfly was the first piece of data. The next day, clutching the barrette in my pocket like a secret weapon, I went back to the park. Not to my balcony perch, but down on the ground, a soldier in enemy territory. I sat on a bench, my posture stiff, my presence a stark gray disruption among the cheerful pastels of parental life. I watched the mothers and nannies pushing swings, Their conversations a meaningless hum. I needed to talk to one of them. The thought alone sent a wave of cold dread through me. It was one thing to be forced into a transactional exchange with a cashier. It was another entirely to initiate a conversation, to ask for help, to willingly expose myself to their judgment. My old self screamed at me. "Go home, you idiot. This is pathetic. You're a creep, sitting on a park bench, obsessing over a child." But the memory of that smile was a tidal wave that drowned out the screaming. I saw a woman sitting alone, watching a boy on the slide. She looked tired, approachable. I took a breath that felt like swallowing sand and walked over. "Excuse me," I said. The words felt alien in my mouth, rusty from disuse. She looked up, her eyes widening slightly at my sudden appearance. A flicker of caution crossed her face. I didn't smile. I didn't know how. "Yes?" I fumbled in my pocket and pulled out the barrette, holding it out on my open palm as if it were a holy relic. "I found this the other day. A little girl, about 4 or 5, I think she dropped it." The woman relaxed a fraction, her eyes going to the clip. "Oh, well, that's nice of you." She glanced around. "I don't think it belongs to any of the kids here now." My heart sank. This was a stupid, pointless plan. She was here last week, with her family, a mother, a father, 2 older brothers. I was just listing facts, data points. It sounded cold, clinical. It sounded like an interrogation. The woman's guard went back up instantly. She pulled her own child a little closer. "I'm not sure I know who you mean." "She had pigtails," I said, the words tumbling out in a rush, desperate to make her understand. "A pink dress. She has a very bright smile." A tiny spark of recognition lit her eyes, but it was quickly extinguished by suspicion. "There are a lot of kids who come through here," she said evasively, getting to her feet. "Maybe you could put it on the community board? The one by the entrance?" She was dismissing me, shutting me down. The old me would have just turned and walked away, the interaction confirming all my worst beliefs about people. But the new, broken me couldn't accept failure. "I think they might be local," I pushed, my voice taking on an edge of desperation I hated. "Does the elementary school nearby, Northwood Elementary, does it have a pre-K program?" Her face hardened completely. "I really have to go," she said, grabbing her son's hand and walking away at a brisk pace, not once looking back. I stood there, the butterfly barrette still in my outstretched hand, the full weight of her rejection crashing down on me. She thought I was a predator, a creep. And why wouldn't she? I was a grim, solitary man, asking about a specific child. My own logic condemned me. I turned and walked away, the shame burning hot on my neck. But the seed had been planted. Northwood Elementary. It was 3 blocks away, a fortress of noise and chaos, the absolute last place on earth I would ever want to go. And I knew, with a certainty that terrified me, that it was where I had to go next. The next afternoon, I found myself standing across the street from the school, just as the final bell was about to ring. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. This was madness. Utter, certifiable madness. I was about to be engulfed in a tidal wave of shrieking children and their doting parents. It was my own personal nightmare. The barrette felt hot in my pocket. The bell rang, a shrill, piercing sound, and the doors burst open. The wave hit. A flood of children poured out onto the lawn, a chaotic swirling mass of backpacks and bright jackets. Parents surged forward, voices calling out names, creating a wall of sound that made me physically recoil. I scanned the faces, my eyes darting through the crowd, searching for one face in a sea of hundreds. It was impossible. A fool's errand. I was just about to turn away, to retreat to my silent apartment and admit defeat, when I saw her. There she was. No pink dress today, but a small blue coat. The pigtails were the same, bouncing as she talked to another little girl. A wave of relief so powerful it made my knees weak washed over me. She was real. She was right there. I took a half step forward, my purpose unclear even to myself. What was I going to do? Yell her name? I didn't even know her name. I was so transfixed, so utterly lost in the moment, that I didn't notice the man approaching me from the side. I didn't notice him until a large, heavy hand clamped down on my shoulder. "Looking for someone?" A deep voice rumbled, low and dangerous, right next to my ear. I froze, my blood turning to ice. I turned my head slowly, and my eyes met a familiar face, but one now twisted into a mask of pure, protective fury. It was her father. The father's grip on my shoulder was like a vice. His face, which I had only seen from a distance in the park, was now inches from mine, and it was a storm of suspicion and anger. He was bigger than me, broader, radiating a palpable aura of paternal menace. My throat went dry. My meticulously logical brain, which had short-circuited a week ago, was now completely offline. All I could feel was a primal, gut-wrenching fear. I stammered, my voice a pathetic croak. My mind raced for a plausible explanation, a coherent sentence, but came up with nothing but static. I was a strange man who had been pointed out by another parent, now staring intently at a group of small children. The optics were, to put it mildly, catastrophic. "I asked you a question," he said, his voice dropping even lower, drawing the attention of a few other parents nearby. They stopped their chatter, their gazes turning towards us, a herd sensing a predator in their midst, or in this case, sensing a predator being confronted. My hand, on instinct, went to my pocket, to the plastic barrette that had become my talisman. It was a stupid move. He saw it, and his eyes narrowed, his grip tightening until I thought my collarbone would snap. "Keep your hands where I can see them," he commanded. "Wait," I finally managed, the word feeling like it was scraped from the bottom of my lungs. "Your daughter. She dropped this." My hand was shaking as I slowly, carefully, pulled the yellow butterfly from my pocket and held it out on my open, trembling palm. He stared at the barrette. His expression didn't soften, but a flicker of confusion passed through the anger in his eyes. He didn't take it. "What were you doing in the park?" he asked, the question still an accusation. "I live there," I said, nodding my head in the direction of my apartment building, visible over the school's roof. "I saw you having a picnic last week. I found this after you left." He looked from the barrette to my building, then back to my face. The pieces were starting to connect for him, but they were forming a picture he clearly didn't understand. Why would a man like me, a man who looked like he gargled with gravel and slept in a crypt, go to all this trouble for a lost hair clip? It was then that the little girl, his daughter, noticed the commotion. She broke away from her friend and ran towards us. "Daddy." He immediately released my shoulder, his entire demeanor shifting as he turned to her. The anger melted away, replaced by a gentle concern. "It's okay, Lily. This man, he found something of yours." Lily. Her name was Lily. It suited her. It was a name that sounded like light. She looked at me, her big brown eyes curious, not frightened. She hadn't made the connection yet. She hadn't recognized the gargoyle from the balcony. Then she saw my hand, still outstretched, holding the yellow butterfly. Her face lit up with that same world-altering incandescence. "My butterfly!" she exclaimed, her voice a pure, happy chime. She reached out with her small hand, not for the barrette, but for me. Her tiny fingers wrapped around one of my own, her touch shockingly warm. "Thank you, mister." And then she looked up at my face and smiled. It was the same smile, the supernova. But this time I was ready. The shattering had already happened. This was something different. It wasn't a violent breaking, but a gentle clicking into place. The pain didn't lance through my chest. Instead, a warmth spread from where her small hand held mine, a slow, creeping tide that pushed back the vast, cold emptiness that had taken root inside me. The lock hadn't just been broken. The door was now being pushed open. I looked down at our joined hands, this impossible bridge between two worlds, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I felt the corners of my own mouth twitch upwards. It was a clumsy, unfamiliar movement, like a muscle that hadn't been used in years. It probably wasn't a real smile. It was probably a grimace, a pained rictus. But it was a start. The father watched this exchange, his expression of hostile suspicion slowly dissolving into one of pure, baffled wonder. He saw his daughter, who was normally shy around strangers, holding my hand without a shred of fear. He saw the strange, cracked expression on my face. He saw something that didn't fit his narrative of a potential threat. "I'm Mark," he said, his voice now stripped of its aggression, leaving only a quiet bewilderment. He extended his free hand. I let go of Lily's hand and took his. My handshake was probably as rusty as my smile. "Arthur," I said. "Thank you, Arthur, for returning this. It's her favorite." It was no trouble, I said, and the lie felt enormous. It had been all the trouble in the world. It had cost me my solitude, my anger, my entire identity. And it had been worth it. Lily tugged on her father's jeans. "Daddy, can we invite Arthur for ice cream, to say thank you properly?" Mark looked at me, an apology, and a question in his eyes. He was seeing me now, not as a monster, but just as a man. A strange, sad man, perhaps, but just a man. He was giving me an out, but he was also giving me an invitation. The old Arthur was screaming in my head. "Say no. Go home. Rebuild the walls. This is temporary. This is a mistake." But the old Arthur had lost the war. I looked down at Lily, who was still beaming up at me, holding her precious butterfly barrette, waiting for my answer. She wasn't asking for anything. She was offering a place in her world of light and warmth, an ice cream, a conversation, a connection, and for the first time, I didn't want the silence. I didn't want the solitude. The symphony of irritation that was the world hadn't gone away. A car alarm started screeching down the street at that very moment. But for the first time, I felt like I might be able to hear the music in it too. I looked back at Mark, and I tried to smile again. This time it felt a little more real. "I'd like that very much,"